Contrary to popular belief, there are many documented cases of highly intelligent people, such as doctors, scientists, and lawyers who join cults. Although I'm no rocket scientist, I consider myself to be a well-rounded and well-adjusted member of society. In 2013, I had been a hairstylist for 5 years with a large clientele. I lived with my then boyfriend of 4 years and had lots of friends and my immediate family nearby. I would hang out with my friends on the weekend, have a Sunday lunch with my family, take care of our dogs, and get ready for another week at the salon. So how did I fall for a commercial cult? It happened in small doses. I was looking to get healthier, and I happened to come across someone offering to coach me with their workout programs and health shake. So I said, okay, why not? I'll try it. I liked the product and I lost some of the weight and felt better, and before I knew it, I was presented with the business opportunity. An opportunity where I could potentially help others do what I did and make money from it. I thought, okay, why not try it for a little bit and see how it goes? Before I knew it, I stopped going out on weekends with friends so I could work my business. And when I would see family, I was always rushed because I knew there was a post I should be making to recruit people to my team, or somebody to message, or a self-help book I needed to read. Within less than 2 years, I was able to quit my job at the salon and go all in with the company. By my 3rd year, I was in the top 1%, but my life almost seemed no longer my own. I was always on, and pretty much everything in my life revolved around the company. I also noticed people who left the company were shunned, and the distributors looked at the CEO and the company as being able to do no wrong. A lot of us started to get sick from stress, and I wonder, what did we really sign up for? When we mentioned how hard things were becoming, we were told to read more personal development and work harder, or buy a training course from a self-proclaimed guru online. I slowly started waking up to a lot of things I hadn't noticed before, and I got to peek behind the curtain of the top performers in the company, and it was ugly. I ended up joining 2 other companies thinking they would be different, until I realized it's not the company, it's the business model. It took me almost 6 years before I finally walked away from the multi-level marketing industry, and I have no doubt what kept me in so long was the toxic positivity. If I attempted to use my critical thinking skills and voice anything that went against the CEO or the company, I was told I was being negative. If I ever complained about one tiny thing, I was told to be careful what I was putting out into the universe because the law of attraction is always working and I would get back what I put out. And at the end of the day, every MLM loves to tell you that you are helping people, and the only way you can fail is if you quit. And let's not forget, if you stop buying product, then you're not going to be helping yourself. And if you're not helping yourself, then how can you help others? And you do want to help other people, right? This type of rhetoric programmed me to shut down any questionable concerns I had about the MLM for fear of being seen as negative or causing bad things to happen to myself or other people. And this kind of thinking even caused me to stay silent for almost 2 years after leaving the MLM industry because I felt so much shame and I was scared of becoming a pessimist or being looked at as a failure. But I now realize I, along with many others, had been a part of a commercial cult. In this video, I interview Duncan, a licensed therapist and former cult member. He and his wife Wendy live in Dallas, Texas, and they ended up leaving their cult because the cult leader didn't want them to get married. In an act of defiance, they chose each other and now live happily and have 8 grandchildren. But the scars still remain, and they now work to bring awareness to others because they know how conspicuously cults can infiltrate our society. Doug and I discuss the mindset it takes to stay aware daily and how to avoid toxic positivity in your life so you can truly live free and avoid becoming a victim. Because where there is smoke, there's fire.
all cults have a sacred science. You know,
I
they
was
have,
going to ask you about that. I literally wrote
yeah.
down sacred science because I wanted
Mhm.
you to tell us the behavior that people can exhibit in social groups, and what can happen in there.
Well, you know, whatever it is going to vary from group to group, and you know, an Eastern yoga cult may have a different sacred science than, you know, than a Christian group. You know, Christians may think I'm not praying enough, or I'm not reading the Bible enough, or whatever it is that they have to do to make the thing work. You know, in your group, maybe you weren't reading enough self-help books, or whatever. And a lot of times, a lot of the multi-level marketing does have some crossover with Christian stuff in this country, or New Age stuff. But you know, so I'm not doing enough of X to make it work, whatever that is. You know, and there's a sacred science. There's a way that you're supposed to be doing things. You know, whether it's read the Bible, pray, confess your sins. You know, sometimes fasting, or other, you know, things like that. But but the point is, you can never do it well enough. You can never really succeed, because it's that guilt that keeps you going. It's that sense of, I'm not doing it right. So you have to believe that it's possible to do it right, but also that you're falling short, so that it's this never ending message of work harder. It's a never ending message of work harder. And that's how they keep you on the treadmill doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wrote down 5 things that I experienced, of how basically like I got roped into a cult and what happened. So I'm gonna just read you those 6 or 5 things that I wrote down, and then I want you to tell me what is like textbook from a cult or not so
Yeah.
much or whatever. So
Uh-huh.
number one, I fell in love with the product. And the product, a lot of the anti-MLM community loves to say like, oh, all the products are junk, all the products are crap, they know, and they're just selling it. Well, that's just not true. Like, there
Yeah.
are good products, and that's how people get involved with it. That's how I got involved in it with it. Of course, you can always find those products just as good elsewhere and cheaper.
Sure.
But that was step one for me, was I fell in love with the product. And step two was I fell in love with the dream, because MLMs
Right.
love to push stories by others who have achieved financial freedom. Obviously, for liability reasons, they can't come out and say you will have financial freedom, but they know how to twist that marketing just enough so that's always the underlying message. So I fell in love with the dream. And then number three, I did everything they said to do, and it worked because I had a large network. So that
Mm-hmm.
only reinforced it to me that it was true, that it works. Um, and number four, once I was in the 1%, like you said, nothing was ever good enough, and it was always said subtly, and there was always emphasis that I needed to do more, more, more.
Mm-hmm.
And number five, towards the end, I felt like I was recruiting to fail. And that's when I started having that light bulb moment, because nothing was ever good enough. I felt like I was recruiting people to fail. People were not achieving what the company said that they could. But anytime you failed or your team failed, it was always your fault.
Right. Right. Well, I I would say that those are all familiar sounding concepts to me. If I, you know, if I take them and apply them in a different way to my Christian group. Um, First of all, although I now believe that a lot of the teaching in my group was false, my cult leader was a magnificent Bible teacher, and I can remember so many times being in Bible study thinking, gosh, I wouldn't want to be anywhere else in the world. I mean, he's taking the scriptures and he's illuminating them like I've never heard before, and this makes so much sense. And so, in essence, the product was appealing. I mean,
Did you watch Waco on Netflix?
I haven't seen that. I'm pretty familiar with what happened with Waco, but I haven't watched that series.
Well,
Somebody
your cult leader reminds me of their cult leader, David. I can't remember his name.
David Koresh.
Yes, because and that's people were so drawn to him because he was so biblically intelligent.
Oh, right, right. And these people, they have charisma, and they have intelligence, and they have insight. So so certainly the product was very, very appealing to me. I wanted to know the Bible. I wanted to understand the Bible. Um, I wanted to be a part of a group of people who loved each other and who were really trying to live, the real Christian ideal. And we were. I mean, we did all kinds of things. We took in the homeless, and it just we were really trying to be a group that was like the real Christians back in the first century, and we were as close as any group could want to be. I mean, these were my brothers and my sisters, and I was there with them when their kids were born, and they were there with me when my kids were born. I mean, we had history together, and had shared so much, and knew everything about each other, and just my closest and best friends ever, until I decided to leave, and and then at which time my name was Mud. I mean, they'd all turn their back on you, but yeah, absolutely. So there was a product there that was tremendous. The product, if you call it that, was tremendously appealing. That appealed to my idealism. That was what I wanted. That appealed to what I was looking for. Just as what was your product appealed to what you were looking for. It had quality, and it had, and you felt like there was integrity there with the people who were producing it, because they were producing a good product. And so, and part of it was, it appealed to your idealism. I want to be involved with something that is, that is quality. Well, and then, moving on up the chain, you were successful, and the technology did work a little bit. And I got to tell you, the technology in my Christian group worked a little bit. A lot of the time I was happy there. We had close relationships, we had fellowship, we had good worship, it was intellectually stimulating because we had good Bible studies. So I mean, it was meeting a lot of my needs. And so it wasn't, and again, you have to realize, I mean, if they never met any of your needs any of the time, they wouldn't succeed. They wouldn't draw any followers. They wouldn't be able to recruit anybody. So to some degree or another, there's got to be something there, and there always is. There always is a little bit there. Same with the yoga groups. I mean, I have no doubt, that there's some benefit to people. They do the exercises, they get in better shape. There's some benefit sometimes to the psychotherapy groups. I mean, people gain insights. They learn a little bit about themselves. But the problem is, and it happens subtly. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens slowly over time. Is that you lose more and more control of your life, and somehow or another, the group and ultimately the leader or the leadership gains more and more control over you.
Yes, absolutely. And I feel from my previous experience, I left an abusive marriage over a decade ago. And upon
Mm-hmm.
getting out, I realized, and then getting out of an MLM, they have these similar um, tactics where it can be hard for people to leave because it's not
Mm-hmm.
all bad,
Right.
you know?
Well, and yeah, and then over time you get more and more dependent on the group, or the person. I always tell people, when they ask, how could you get into a cult? I say, well, how could a woman marry an abusive man? Well, because he wasn't abusive at first.
Right.
Initially, he was charming. He took you on dates. He brought you flowers. He was charming. He was somebody who, seemed like he would add something positive to your life. And so you get more and more involved with somebody, and then eventually you are in a situation where, uh, where it gets harder and harder, and the longer you go, the harder it gets to extricate yourself, because you're all tied up with this person or this group, financially, emotionally, every other way. And no, it's not all bad, but usually over time it gets worse. It starts off good, and over time, the more stuck you are, the more they can just be blatant about exercising power.
I always say a good cult is so fun in the beginning.
Exactly. Exactly. No, they're great. There's even a concept that we talk about in cult stuff called love bombing,
Yeah.
where when you're there at first, the group will love bomb you, and they naturally do it. They may not be trained to do it, but it's what they do. Here's a new person. Let's make them feel welcome. And you think, gosh, these are the nicest people. This is great. This is wonderful. I mean, yeah, I'm really comfortable here. These seem like great folks.
Yeah, absolutely. And I, for a long time, didn't speak out against the MLM community when I left because I was obviously ashamed. I was
Hmm.
embarrassed. For a long time, I thought, oh, it was just me. Like, you should have done more of something. And I also thought that it would die out, that the MLM community would just fade out because it was
No,
becoming so saturated. And then when the pandemic started, I saw so many MLM companies just preying on scared, innocent people. And that's when I was like,
right.
I have to start my anti-MLM channel because I see what's going on and I can't just stay silent and let it happen. And it's just what's so insidious I've noticed with these MLM companies is that they're able to flourish so well due to social media and all these private subgroups you can have.
Right, right, right. And we've talked about that a little bit with cults too. This is a new thing, newer thing with cults is the recruitment through social media, and they're getting more sophisticated at it. And so I think that's something that we're going to see more and more. And it's possible for groups like that to be kind of under the radar a little bit, and
Hmm.
so they're not as visible to society at large. And so you've got people getting all wound up in all kinds of crazy things through social media. And it's the same process. At first you come into a group, and they're warm, they're welcoming, it's like, my people, I found them finally. And then over time, it turns to something much darker and much more sinister.
Absolutely. It absolutely does. And these groups are like when I left, at first it was like, oh, we wish you well, yada, yada. And for a while, I actually spoke out against the CEO of my first group and some of the practices that I saw that were happening that were just so horrible. And I was completely cyberbullied. I was gossiped
Oh yeah.
about. There were videos made about me and others who left saying that, oh, we didn't earn what we said we did. We didn't help our team. Um, but I noticed all this stuff was only happening in the groups, which I was sent screenshots or whatever. But then
Hmm.
on their public profiles, it was the good appearance of, oh, Jesus gave me this business. And
Right, right, right. Yeah, and that is, that's another characteristic of cults, is that dispensing of existence. Lifton talks about that. It's like, if you're not one of us, you're dead to me now, kind of thing. It's like your worth and value is that you are part of the group, but once you leave, you're nothing.
is very black and white thinking,
Yes, absolutely.
which I've noticed with cults as well. Um, so going forward with how multi-level marketing is operating now, or these commercial cults, if people won't pay attention to the income disclosures of these MLM companies, because they all have them and they can be very hard to find, but the
Hmm.
FTC makes them have their income disclosures on their website, and they show that only 1% or less make income, good, like a sustainable income
Right.
from this. But I know when I joined, I don't, obviously they're very hard to find and I didn't look at them when I joined, but then when they were shown to me, I was already very indoctrinated and I was like, oh, well, a lot of people just sign up, just to get the product at a discount, and those numbers aren't accurate, or people don't work as hard as they say they do. That was my mindset. So now going forward, people are looking at the income statements, but I feel like they're still lured in. Is there any other way to warn people?
Yeah, well, doing what you're doing and getting the message out there as much as you can. This has been a big topic in the cult world, and I remember talking with some folks at a NICSA meeting about this, and it's like, we've been doing what we're doing for years, but new cults keep cropping up, and that's and so I don't know that there's a way to really just wipe them out. It must feel like being a policeman or something. It's like, we'll keep arresting the criminals, but new people keep growing up and turning to crime, and it just seems like you never can completely eliminate it. So education is the key. I think we educate people as much as we can, and hopefully you can get the message out to enough people, and in some cases you can prevent people from getting into that kind of thing. And some people are going to get in and become disillusioned and come back out. That's what's going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. What would you say to those who say the anti-MLM community just needs to leave them alone, like they're just being negative? Women are just trying to make money and trying to make a better life for themselves.
Well, I would say that you're there trying to keep people from getting ripped off. You've got absolutely nothing, and nor do I, nor would anybody have anything against women, making money and making a better life for themselves. But if that's what they want to do, then there are much more legitimate channels to do that, rather than getting involved in something that is going to exploit them. So it's not that you're trying to be negative about women. You're actually trying to help them avoid something that's going to be to their detriment.
Absolutely. Can you give us examples and explain the difference between thought programming and undue influence, or are they the same?
I think it's a continuum. They're pretty much the same kind of concept of coercive control, undue influence, thought reform. It's all a continuum. It's this is the way that I think about it. If you're going to ask somebody to do something or present them with an opportunity, then in counseling and in mental health, um, you know, we talk about informed consent, that somebody should be able to make a decision to consent to something when they're fully informed about what it is that they're deciding. So a lot of people will compare maybe getting into the military with getting into a cult. And what I would say is there's a difference, because there's informed consent. You know pretty much what you're signing up for when you sign up for the military. You have you have an enlistment contract. You have a period of time you're going to be there. You know how much money they're going to pay you. You know that they're going to train you to do certain things, and then you know that at the end of it you can get back out if you want to, or you can re-enlist. But so you know what the deal is really and truly up front. You don't know that when you're getting into an MLM. You really don't. I mean, uh, they do certain things to spin it a certain way, so that what you think you're getting into is not really what it was. You didn't know when you got involved that even if you made it to the top 1%, and kudos to you that you were able to do that, that says a lot of good things about you and your motivation and your drive to succeed. But still, you didn't know that if you got to that 1%, that it still wouldn't be satisfying.
Well, or that it would be so hard for others to make it
Mhm.
as well. And, when anybody would say, like, hey, that like 99% of people lose money in network
Right.
marketing, like I said, we were trained to be like, oh no, people just don't work hard enough. They didn't do
Right.
enough personal development. They didn't have enough accountability. They didn't do X, Y, and Z. And I mean, we were just brainwashed.
And yeah, you had gone through a process of thought reform so that you looked at everything in a certain way, because you had been convinced that that's the way that it is. But once you take a more objective look at it, you're able to stand aside and look at it from the outside. You say, no, that's not really the way that it is. So you didn't really have informed consent. You didn't
Right.
really know, and the other people didn't really know what they were signing up for. And so to me, I think that's the thing. That's the key concept. It's, are if you're signing up for something, make sure you know absolutely, what the deal is that you're signing up for.
Absolutely. Um, let's see here. So when I left the network marketing, I went through like a deep, deep depression and a loss of self worth. And I still struggle a little bit with those today, even after being out for almost 2 years. I also noticed I began to question my decisions all
Mhm.
the time. I
Yeah.
was constantly questioning myself. It was really hard for me to make a decision. I had never experienced that before. I was always very like, this is what we're doing, taking charge, very, very authoritative, very good in a leadership role. And I was just like, who am I? Where did this come from? I also felt very adrift in life, like Tom
Hmm.
Hanks in Castaway. I was just like,
Yeah.
what is my purpose now? So,
Yeah.
what would you say? Like, are there any type of things that people, besides obviously working with a licensed counselor, are there any things that practices that people can implement when they get out and they feel like that? Because even though I was in the 1%, and even though I was in for over 5 years, I've heard from people who were only in for 3 months who were
Hmm.
like, it's still affecting me years later.
Yeah. Yeah. It rocks your world. Well, and I think it's the same kind of thing when maybe you make a bad relationship choice and you end up with some guy that is just a total loser, and then you start to think, gee, do I even know how to pick somebody to be with? That kind of thing. So yeah. Yeah, I think you have to do the work and go back and relook at it. But I think it is helpful to people if they learn about cults and they learn about thought reform, because what you realize is that somebody pulled a fast one on you. You actually got victimized and you were deceived through no fault of your own. I mean, you may have had certain vulnerabilities, but to have vulnerabilities is to be human. We all have those.
It's true.
But but somebody took advantage of those and exploited your weaknesses against you. And again, we all have weaknesses. We're human. None of us is Superman. Um, I mean, I think processing that through with a counselor is a good idea, especially if you can find someone who's kind of savvy about this kind of thing. Um, the lady that I saw, the counselor that I saw when I first came out of my group, that I just happened to um, luck into, really,
Yeah.
um, was a good fit for me, because even though she didn't have any background in cults, she had a lot of background helping women leave abusive relationships, and she was able to kind of apply some of those principles, and there are similarities. So um, and helping a person rebuild their self-esteem. um, but I think a lot of it is just to understand and to forgive yourself. I mean, my goodness, yeah, you got taken advantage of, but that happens to a lot of people. It doesn't mean you're weak. It doesn't mean you're stupid. In fact, cults don't want weak, stupid people. I promise you, your MLM isn't looking for weak, stupid people. They're looking for people who are smart, who are go getters. So because those people are the ones that have the most skills that they can use. So that's a friend of mine who's also a former member of my cult. When people would say to him something about, well, I'm too smart to get in that, and he would always say to him, you weren't smart enough that we would have let you in. So yeah, so yeah, you are somebody who has talents. Um, you've got abilities. You've got the capacity to be a persuasive and a creative person. Uh, you just you just got uh, swindled
Exploited.
into using those skills in the wrong way for the wrong people at the wrong time.
Right. What would you recommend for somebody who, for example, when I got out of my first company, I ended up joining two other companies that I was
Mhm,
also able to make it to the top end. But
mhm.
I remember going into my second company and thinking, this company is going to be so much better. Like everything bad that I experienced was with that company back there. And then in these other two companies, I was just like, oh my gosh, this is just as much of a nightmare. And that's when I woke up and realized it's not just a certain company, it's the entire model.
Right,
But yet, even getting out of the MLMs, I was still so drawn, and it was very hard for me when people would message me and be like, "Hey, hun, I have this opportunity." It was so hard for me to not look at it or to be enticed by a product and join, especially knowing that you can make money with it. I still was like, "Oh my gosh!" And I see a lot of women and men who join company after company after
right,
company, and even some who have been out and are in these survivor groups, and they're like, why is it so hard to not join?
right. And then at that point, that's where you have to look at yourself, and that's a tough piece of recovery. It's later recovery. The first part of recovery, I always say to people, it's education first. You learning about thought reform, learning about the way unscrupulous manipulators take advantage of people. That's the first task in recovery, because you do have to realize that you have been victimized. But if you were a woman who had been married to five alcoholic men in a row, I'm not to justify any of those abusive alcoholic men, but at some point, um, then you're going to have to back up in your recovery and say, what am I doing? You know,
Mm-hmm.
what what hole in myself am I trying to fill? That makes it easy for people or companies or groups like that to manipulate me.
Right. Why do I keep repeating this pattern? What is
Yeah.
lacking? What am I lacking that I think I can make up for with these companies?
Right, exactly. So, and that's of course, then we're getting in honestly into pretty deep psychotherapy to work on those kinds of issues. Those are not the first issues. That's I always call that a late recovery task to try to then figure out why you had those vulnerabilities. Not that you can make yourself an invulnerable person,
Right.
but but it is a late recovery task to start to figure out, what is my vulnerability here, and is there something I need to do about that? What's this aching hole in my
Right.
being that
Which can stem all the way back into childhood, That's
and
why you need
usually
a licensed
does.
therapist.
Right. So that's certainly there, and that's real, but I would also say, just so people know, just because I've gotten in a group like that doesn't mean that I'm some kind of mutant or something, because everybody does have vulnerabilities. Everybody does. Um, but maybe as we get more mature and further along in our spiritual development, then we are able to address those things.
And what made you, when you got out of the cult and you and your wife were picking up the pieces, and fortunately you guys
Hmm.
had each other,
Right.
what made you become a licensed therapist, and how much schooling did you still have left to do, and how old were you when you got out?
Yeah. Well, when I left the group, I was 42. So I went back to get a master's degree. I had a bachelor's degree
So
from,
you were able to complete your bachelor's while in the cult?
I was able to complete my bachelor's while in the cult. So I had a bachelor's degree, and I'm glad I did. That was great. Um, and so when I got out, shortly after I got out, I started a master's degree program. And it was really for that kind of those reasons. I wanted to understand about how, how I worked. And there's a saying that everybody who's in mental health got in because they're looking for a self-cure. And I think that is true to some degree, is that everybody that goes into mental health is trying to, kind of figure out, you know, why am I this way?
But
And
at least we're aware.
so we're asking the question, which is a good first step. Um, I went straight through and got my master's degree working part time. And of course, I was married, so my wife was working at that time, and was able to do that. That was hard. That was hard, but I was used to being in Bible study almost every night of the week. So being in class almost every night of the week didn't feel like as big a transition as it maybe would for some people. And as I mean, cults are such a grind. I mean, or MLMs. I mean, you're used to working incredibly hard.
So hard.
So yeah. Working at a job and going to school at the same time really didn't seem like that much of a problem for me, because I was used to working really, really hard.
Oh, I understand.
Yeah.
I had to show myself grace because I kept feeling so depressed and guilty for
Hmm.
all that energy I put into those 6 years that I could never
Right.
get back. And I was like, I could have almost had a master's degree. I could have done
Right.
so many things with that energy. What was I thinking? But you just have to be kind to yourself.
You have to be kind to yourself, and that's something that I've learned along the way as well. And maybe um, in retrospect, going back to school and working and doing all the stuff I did, I might, if I had it to do over again, maybe I wouldn't push myself quite as hard as I did, but I did push myself, and I got through my master's degree in 2.5 years while working. So,
Wow.
um, and then, of course, then you go through the process and, do your internships and do all that stuff. But, so it was good for me, and it worked for me. And I was a good fit for counseling, because I'm kind of got naturally that kind of personality. And I did that kind of thing in the cult, honestly. I mean, people who, I sort of was a de facto counselor often, for people. Of course, I applied a lot of troubling doctrine to the situation that I wouldn't now. But now I realize absolutely you do have to have grace with yourself, and you do have to be kind to yourself and treat yourself like a friend, like you would a friend. So and so I'm going much easier on myself these days. But
I'm very
uh,
thankful for Brene Brown's work because she taught
yes,
me to be
I
kind to
love her.
myself.
Absolutely love
I
her.
I love that you went back to school later in life because
Hmm.
I think so many people, myself included, get to their 30s, 40s, and we're like looking at what we thought we wanted or accomplished or didn't accomplish, and we're like, this is not where I want to be. So how old were you when you finished your internships and were able to start practicing?
Well, about 45.
That's
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah. Which I think, and thank God, I've always had good health, and so it was not uh, such a thing. But yeah, I was a little bit older, and I do remember one time in one of our classes in school, where the professor had us all stand up, and he divided us into groups, and he said, okay, everybody who's over 40 on this side and everybody who's under 40 on this side. And he was trying to make a point of separating people out by groups. And there was a thing, those of us who were over 40, I mean, we were self-conscious, and it felt a little uncomfortable. And he was making the point, see, that's how it feels. And so you don't want to do that, in a counseling situation. A lot of the people, of course, would go on to be school counselors and other things. And so, he's trying to illustrate, look, you don't want to put people in a situation where you make them feel uncomfortable because of the group that they're a part of or whatever. So,
Hmm.
um, but yeah, I have a clear, memory of that, of like, oh, gee, I'm one of the old people. And uh, But looking back on it from my age now, I think, you weren't old.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But that's one thing. Everybody feels old at the age that they are. So whatever age you are, you may be 40 and think you're old, and you may be 50 and think you're old. But then you'll get 10, 15 years on and look back on it and go, what was I thinking? I wasn't old. My daughter thinks she's old now, and I'm like, girl, you don't know anything about being old.
That's so
Yeah,
funny. I know. I've always noticed people always say I'm too old or I'm too young. They never say I'm the
right,
perfect age to do
right.
anything.
Right. But no, you're not too old. You're never too old. You do whatever you want to do. I mean, growth is a lifelong process. So
Yes.
if something appeals to you and it helps you grow and move toward where you want to be, then go for it.
Absolutely. And it's so interesting because there is this stigma around cults that it's only broken, damaged people who fall for them. And like you said, like they want smart people. There are very well
Absolutely.
educated people in cults, which is, I mean, just the fact that you were able to finish your bachelor's shows
Hmm.
that they were encouraging of that, or you probably wouldn't have done it.
Hey, listen, in my cult that I was in, um, we had journalists, we had at least one lawyer, we had a CPA, we had teachers, we had a lot of smart people in our group. It was not, in fact, we had several journalists. There was a thing, where we had some journalists, but we had a lot of really smart people in our group. It wasn't, um, like you said, it wasn't stupid, damaged people or anything like that. I mean, they were very, very smart, accomplished, um, and honestly, a lot of them, very nice people. I mean, if you sat
Right.
down and had went to dinner with those folks, you'd think, gee, what a great group of people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, I met some of like the most nicest people ever
Hmm. Yeah.
in all my time. And there's some who like that got out when I did, and we still talk,
Hmm.
but it's, yeah, I mean, there are all types, all kinds in these cults.
Hmm. There are.
Absolutely. What would you what would you recommend? How can people build their critical thinking muscles? Are there any
Oh, that's such a good.
practices that they can
Yeah.
implement?
That's a good question, and that was a big interest of mine for several years. I read a lot of books on critical thinking. Um, One of the things you find out is that critical thinking can't take place in a vacuum. It has to be applied to something. So I generally just a lot of reading. I mean, you can read books about logic and about critical thinking, and if you look at my books behind me, you'll see a bunch of them. But just the idea of critical thinking in a vacuum, it has to be applied to something. So um, the best thing that I can tell people is to learn to read, to become educated, and that helps you more than anything. And then um, learn about cults. That'll give you something, a way to think critically about a process that you've already been through and that you can relate to, or read books about multi-level marketing from a critical perspective, and read things from different sides, to take some issue and read something for and read something against.
Hmm.
um, and that's always the thing. Don't let yourself be in a bubble. This is part of the problem that happens with our politics now, is that people are in silos. They're either all one way or all the other. And I don't care which side of the aisle that you're on. You should read and listen to and think about things from the other side some of the
Hmm.
time. Ask yourself every once in a while, what if they're right about this? And really try to think about it.
Absolutely. There will be times where I'm reading the news and there are certain articles from certain networks that I just don't want to read because I'm like, that
Right.
network is so biased. But I'm like, well, let's see the other side, and I'll make
Sure.
myself click on it.
Right. And that's exactly the right thing to do, is don't let yourself get in a silo where you're only reading what is self-reinforcing, because then you're not thinking, then you're just reinforcing yourself. You're just rationalizing. man is not a rational animal so much as he is a rationalizing animal. So, um, so it's best to challenge yourself.
I agree. How do you feel about NLP, neuro linguistic
Hmm.
programming? Because this is something that I noticed as I got more involved in the
Hmm.
MLM world, that people like Tony Robbins and all
Hmm.
these other self-help speakers are really popular in that world. And then I started noticing non-licensed coaches uh, doing NLP workshops where you could
Right.
pay a $3,500 fee and fly out and be there for 3 to 5 days and get certified as an NLP practitioner. Um, and I've never been against NLP. I did hear a coach say that it can be used for good or bad. And she said, for example, she was not a fan of Tony Robbins. And at the time, I was like all about Tony Robbins. And I remember her saying, if you look at the documentary I Am Not Your Guru, which is his documentary on Netflix,
Mhm.
the human brain cannot process the word not. So what you're really reading is I am your guru. That's one
Right.
thing that she said. So I never really thought anything about NLP. I thought like, oh, it's a really great communication tool, until listening to Stephen Hassan's book, Combating Cult Mind Control. He said he is not a fan of
Yeah.
NLP. So I wanted to
I'm
get
not
your
a
take
fan.
on it.
Not a fan. And it's not something that I've read super deeply into, but the things that I've read have pretty much been negative on it.
Tell me why. Explain. Open my mind.
Um, well, I mean, for one of the things, I think part of the deal is that it's like trying to overdose yourself on positivity. You remember when you were talking about that kind of thing. So
Hmm.
it's sort of like a way of brainwashing yourself in a sense. And
I could see that.
um, yeah, so I don't want to brainwash myself at this point. What I want to do is to be rational and to be open and to think critically. And I'm afraid that neurolinguistic programming leads in a different direction. Also, um, from a study or two that I've looked at, I'm not sure that it really works. I mean, I don't think it really does what people say that it does. And if you do, really try to do, peer-reviewed kind of studies, does this work? Does this help? I think some of the literature suggests that it actually doesn't. Also, I'm a super 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 not fan of people, and there you can't process the word not, but no, I'm not a fan of people uh, doing things like counseling because they went to an intensive 3-day weekend seminar. I got a whole master's degree in it, and what you find out when you get a master's degree in is that that just gives you the foundation so that you can continue your lifetime of learning. It's a skill set that has to be um, practiced, and there's a lot more to it than you can go for a 3-day workshop and figure out how to get inside people's heads. That's not going to end well. You've got to be very very like the Hippocratic oath, first do no harm. That's got to be like number one thing. So you want to be very very careful and know what you're doing before you start trying to get into people's emotional issues and their difficulties. So
Absolutely. And I noticed I when I left the MLM world, I joined a lot of life coaching groups. I paid thousands of dollars for several different courses, a lot of money. And I noticed this trend. A lot of people who leave the MLM world, they're
mhm,
like, well, I still want to help people until they become life coaches. But I noticed that in these trainings by nobody who was licensed, right?
mhm,
I noticed a lot of the same toxic positivity
right,
and
right,
thought stopping techniques, even though I didn't know that's what they were called. And something in me was just like, no, 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 no. And I just eventually just like moved away from it and didn't do it. And I mean, I only promoted it for like a few months, but I was like, this just does not feel right to me at all. And I think it's
right.
exactly what you're saying.
Yeah. The human psyche is much, much more complicated than that. I mean, if it were a matter of just, repeating feel good phrases and all of that, no, it's much more complicated than that.
Absolutely. Do you plan to get your doctorate someday?
You know, I don't have any immediate plans to do that, but that's something that I'm open to. Um, I there are some other things that I'm interested in, some things with developmental psychology and so on. So it's possible that I'll do some more work in the future, but in the meantime, I'm just doing what I'm doing, and I'm having a good time with it. And we do our support groups, and we try to help former cult members. In fact, we have a support group later this afternoon that we're doing by Zoom. So we'll be
Oh,
meeting with a bunch of former members this afternoon, and so I'm happy doing what I'm doing right now, and we'll see if anything opens up in the future.
good. I have two last questions for
Hmm.
you. This has been fantastic. Thank you so much. So, what can we, the people, do to help the United States create laws against coercive control like they have in the UK?
Yeah. Um, well, you have to get involved. Get involved in politics. Maybe make a connection with your congressperson. Um, I haven't gotten real politically involved in that. Um, I it's so difficult.
It's
It is.
exhausting.
Well, but the whole idea of how do you do that, in the United States with our traditions and our history and the Bill of Rights and which I'm 100% in favor of all of it, freedom of religion. I'm willing to tolerate the fact that we're going to have a bunch of cults running around because I think freedom of religion is a good thing. Now, I will criticize the cults and I will try to educate people about the cults. And I'm allowed to do that partly because I have freedom of speech.
Mhm.
But um, I, I'm squeamish about government, too much government getting
Control.
into it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Um,
a hard one because if you take away certain laws, then you take away from other people who are doing good.
Right, right. So, I'm familiar with the fact that they do have the coercive control laws in England. I don't know that they've ended up being used with cults much. What happens is they're applied in situations, kind of what we call one-to-one cults, where you have an abusive, partner in a domestic relationship, that kind of thing. Um, that's where I think those have been most applied, even in the UK. I'll have to ask. I do have some friends and contacts over in the UK, former cult members. So I need to ask them how it's going with that. I'd be interested.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. What books would
Hmm.
you recommend off the top of your head for critical thinking? And also tell us your wife's book.
Oh, okay. Well, I just happen to have my wife's book on my table here. Uh, it's called "I Can't Hear God Anymore: Life in a Dallas Cult." Um, and you can go to our website www.dallascult.com and order it from us, or I'm sure that there's a secondary market on Amazon.
I
There's
saw that it had really good reviews on Amazon.
Yeah, yeah. Um, she wrote it. I guess it's probably been about 13 or 14 years ago now. And every time I pick it up to refer to anything, I always think this is still what we would say. So the book is wearing very, very well over time. What she says in the book is, and she says the same thing, is still exactly what we would say. It's not something that I feel like I've got to say, well, I'm in a different place now or anything. The book is holding up really, really well. Um, and I think part of it is because the story is kind of timeless in a way. It actually is our love story. I mean, we fell in love. We were in the cult together. They wouldn't let us get married, and we got married. We eloped, and we left. And of course, a lot of stuff happens, and there's some drama. But uh,
I
but
can't wait to read it.
yeah, I think it does hold up well, and people seem to like it who read it. For general, boy, that's a good one. General critical thinking. um, the you know, I did it. I did actually a YouTube talk one time on critical thinking that's on the ICSA website, I believe, if it's still up there. It's been a few years ago.
On your
Uh,
website?
no, it's on the website of the International Cultic Studies Association. Because
Oh.
I did the talk at one of their conferences. I did a workshop on critical thinking, and other people have over time. The seminar on was like, you know, six mistakes we make in thinking, um, and Tom Gilovich or something like that. Um, that I thought was really good. That was a good synopsis of the kinds of mistakes that we tend to make. Um, we believe stories rather than statistics. Stories are always persuasive, and that's what, you know. And so good marketers and so on, they tell stories because we're hardwired to believe stories. But actually, statistics are truer if you would really pay attention to statistics. And that's really super hard to do. Nobody naturally thinks that way.
Right.
But that's you actually get a better approximation of reality through statistics than you do through stories, because what happens through stories is you get anecdotes, and so you have the anecdote of, you know, the person who had great success through the process of doing whatever. But statistically, if you realize that person is 1 in 1,000, that's actually giving you a truer picture of reality. But the story is more compelling.
I
So
know. We always used to, I hate this saying, but we always said it in network marketing was facts tell, but stories sell. Oh, I
right,
hate that. And when I was in, like after I got out, I told you I felt like Tom Hanks out in,
yeah,
Castaway, just adrift. Like, what am I going to do with my life? I thought, oh, well, maybe I'll go to college for marketing. And the
yeah,
more that I looked into it, I just thought, I hate this. This is so manipulative. And it
right,
reminded me of exploit. If you had any type of story in your life, whether you had cancer or you had something horrible happen, you were told to exploit that story,
right,
you
right.
know? And so now I'm looking into doing one day what you're doing, possibly, hopefully. You've definitely inspired me.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, it's the manipulation that it's like you said, the statistics don't lie.
Yeah, the statistics are really the thing and not the story. And so, and he goes that, you know, 6 other things. Um, Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman is a good one. Um,
Okay.
and see, again, what happens is, and that's that whole book is very interesting. We have 2 ways of thinking. We have our gut response that's you know, based on a quick read of patterns,
I've
and
heard
then
that called the lizard brain.
it could be right, and it, but it's your you know, your intuitive response to things, and it's not always wrong. Sometimes it's very right. Sometimes sometimes it is right, and it's there for a reason. Because a lot of times in survival mode, you know, you have to make a quick decision. You know, this feels like a dangerous situation. Get out. And you may not be able to stop and think slowly to analyze, but the thinking slow is where you really stop and go through the facts and try to analyze something. And uh, and that's much harder to do. It's something you have to train yourself to do and really ask. And most of the time you don't need to for most of the situations in life. What do I want for dinner? Well, you know, whatever. But if you're really trying to examine the truth claims of something, you do need to stop down, you know, slow down, and do that slow thinking where you go through it systematically. The You don't want to stop thinking. You know, the slow thinking, you know, means to methodically and carefully and thoughtfully and deliberately look at something. That's a good thing, but it takes a lot of energy, and you can't do that with everything. You just can't. You can't do that and function as a human being trying to do that with everything. So some of the time you do kind of have to go with the flow and, you know, do intuitive things, and that's okay. That's how we live most of the time. But if somebody is trying to sell you something, or makes an extraordinary claim, and you really need to and it's really going to make a difference what you do. Sometimes you might want to slow down and do that slow thinking where you go through analytically and try to figure things out. So thinking fast and slow would be one that I would recommend as well.
Wonderful. I wrote that down. Thank you so very much. Where can my audience find you? Your website, if you're on
Yeah,
social media.
right. Um, well, we have dallascult.com, as I've mentioned. Um, we also have a Facebook page. It's called um, Cult Awareness Ministry is our Facebook page. So those would be the two things. I'm in Dallas, Texas, and so I'm a licensed counselor in Texas. Um, so if anybody's in the area and has issues like this and they want to contact us, they can go through our website or message me through Facebook or
Do you
whatever.
take Zoom clients as well?
Um, I do. That's a new thing. I haven't before. I always prefer to be face to face with people, but in this time of social distancing. However, there are licensure issues. So right now I'm only taking Zoom clients who live in Texas. So because I'm licensed to practice in the state of Texas and not in other states. Now, with this whole thing that's going on, there may be some changes on the horizon eventually about those kind of licensure issues. There's a lot of issues in our society are going to have to be rethought, and people are going to change the way they do things. But for now, I'm licensed in Texas, so I would only want to see somebody in Texas.
All right, good to know. So Texans watching this,
Yeah.
reach out to them.
Fortunately, Texas is pretty big, so that includes a lot of people.
That's true. That's very
Yeah.
true. Thank you so much, Doug, for being here.
Thank you, Josie. You've been wonderful. I had a great time.
Thank you for all your info. Have a great rest of your weekend.
You too. Bye bye.
Bye.